Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you'll need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets. Nigeria's main index has gone over the 40,000 mark once again for the first time since February. At these levels, in fact, it's pared most of the losses that it made earlier in the year. On a year-to-date basis, it's down around 0.1%. Same as yesterday, Dangote Cement led gains. It closed 7.3% higher. The energy and synthetics fuels firm Sasol had a strong run at the JSE. It's gone up for the 7th day in a row. In fact, at these levels, its price has gone up by 115% so far in the year. Compare that to the 8.6% rise in the JSE All-Share over the same period. Here's what's coming up tonight. South Africa's unemployment crisis worsens as another 86,000 jobs are lost in the formal sector in the second quarter. We'll explore why Ethiopia is forecasting earnings of over $1.2 billion from coffee exports in the current fiscal year. And the UK government puts dozens of soldiers on standby to help deal with a crippling energy crisis. We start the hour in the world of payments. A new cross-border digital payment system is being rolled out across Africa. It's the latest bid to boost trade and investment. The digital financial system is expected to make payment for goods and services within the continent a lot easier, but crucially a lot cheaper too. The growth of intra-continental trade is one of the many aims of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai with this report from Accra.
It's hoped this new digital payment system will revolutionize trade within Africa. Known as the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, it allows instant payments in local currencies within the continent. One huge advantage of the new technology is reducing the need for foreign currencies. So businesses who currently rely on currencies such as the US dollar or euro for payments and transactions within the continent should be able to avoid expensive exchange and transaction fees. One estimate is that the system could save the continent more than $5 billion in payment transaction costs every year. It should also help the continent's cash-light economy drive by reducing the reliance on hard cash for payments of goods and services. The financial system was developed by the Afrexim Bank with the support of central banks of African countries that have signed the Continental Free Trade Pact. It was launched in 2019 and after a trial system in West Africa has now officially begun operating. The Afrexim Bank says it has approved $500 million to be channeled towards scaling up the connectivity of the digital payment system within the sub-region, and an estimated $3 billion will be provided to support the continent-wide rollout. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
On to South Africa, the country's unemployment crisis continues to worsen. Another 86,000 jobs in the formal sector were lost between April and June this year, according to Statistics South Africa, which has released its quarterly employment survey. Africa's most industrialized economy has been battling to create enough employment opportunities for over a decade now. But the outbreak of COVID is making matters a lot worse. Here's Sumitra Naidu with this report.
Manufacturing and construction, two key employers, cut a combined 22,000 jobs in the second quarter of this year.
We know that the disruptions to global supply chains had a negative impact even on our manufacturing sector, and we saw lower activity as a result of that. For the wholesale and retail trade, there's always that seasonal slowdown in the second quarter.
But it was community services that shed the most, cutting 65,000 jobs between April and end June.
This equates to about a 1% loss between the first quarter of 2021 and the second quarter of 2021. And it means that in South Africa, our total employment levels have reduced from 9.65 million in March 2021 to 9.566 million in June 2021.
Unemployment in South Africa is at a record 34.4%. An estimated 12 million people are unemployed. Thousands lost work in the liquor industry as a result of the alcohol bans. This also affected tourism and hospitality. The civil unrest that occurred in July in two of the country's main provinces is also expected to have a long-term impact on the economy and employment.
in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng will definitely show in the numbers, because there's an estimate that around 150,000 jobs were lost in the retail sector in particular. So those will definitely contribute to a weaker number in the third quarter.
Close to 15% of the population has been vaccinated thus far. The economy is open and all efforts are being concentrated on strengthening businesses. However, COVID remains a concern.
There may be a fourth wave, but with the increase in vaccinations, we should also see that there is in fact a delay. So the extent to which our economic recovery can be accelerated right now is directly proportional to the number of people that receive the vaccine.
The quarterly employment survey looks specifically at formal sector employment. In 2018, the survey showed just over 10.1 million people employed in the non-agricultural sector. That figure is down to just over 9.5 million. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to Tanzania now. The Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange has joined Rwanda and Kenya's bourses as East African bourses are racing to attract more companies to list and to end this persistent drought in IPOs. The bourse is implementing a program designed to support SMEs in their quest for long-term stable capital from investors. Through the project, SMEs will also get capacity building for sustainable business management. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with this report.
The Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange, or the DSE, has joined Rwanda and Kenya market campaigns to increase the number of companies listing on the exchange. The Endeleza project takes small and medium-sized businesses through a mentorship program to prepare them for the possibility of going public. Victoria Microfinance is one of the 9 companies under the program. The company's management team says the company has helped provide loans for over 9,000 small-scale farmers and has been in operation for 12 years. But through the program, they have already seen more growth.
We learned about governance. We learned about, legal framework of business. We learned about even things like how you can be able to raise capital, various ways of raising capital. A lot of very good mentors, very good program. I think it's one of the best programs I have ever, attended so far.
The exchange is using the program to prepare companies to raise capital from the exchange by inoculating good corporate government practices and helping them to keep proper books of accounts.
In our estimate, we think in a 3 to 5 years period, we might see these companies which are now in Endeleza graduating to come into either the enterprise growth market segment of the market or the main investment market of the DSE.
In Tanzania's financial markets, perhaps the most popular investment scheme is a savings account from banks that are licensed by the Bank of Tanzania. Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange's CEO Moremi Marwa feels more listings would allow companies and citizens to invest in a wider portfolio.
If you look at our economies, which are young economies and we are still developing economies, most of the enterprises that pays taxes to the revenue authority or creates jobs and employment to our people, they are coming from the SME space. So much as it's easy for SMEs to tap into the banking or microfinance or Vikoba and SACCOs as part of their capital, but we think also there are some that will qualify to get the patient kind of capital that is obtained in the capital market.
East African countries are considered the most expensive markets for stock investors in the continent, with a bulk of the trading costs related to brokerage fees. The country's biggest IPO was listed in August of 2017 when the telecom company Vodacom raised $206 million. It attracted more than 40,000 local investors, most of whom were first-time participants in the country's stock exchange. The DSE hopes to recreate that in the near future through programs like Endeleza. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Still in East Africa, annual inflation in Kenya hit a 19-month high in September, rising to 6.91%, driven higher by increases in the food and non-alcoholic beverages and transport indices. Now, the food index rose by 10.6% in the last 12 months. The transport index was about 9.2% higher. Prices on some food items, in fact, have risen by double digits, including a 31% rise in the price of cabbages. Energy prices are taking a bigger and bigger chunk out of household expenditure. Petrol and diesel prices over 20% higher compared to last September. Households are also spending 20% more on liquefied petroleum gas and nearly 33% more on kerosene. Kenya Central Bank has flagged rising inflation risk from domestic and foreign sources in its MPC meeting this week. And we continue our company roundup here in Kenya. Lawmakers have backed a cabinet decision to amend the air services agreement between the East African nation and the United States. That will see Kenya Airways expand its route network. KQ is currently operating scheduled passenger services between Nairobi and New York directly. Kenya signed the deal with the US last year and is proposed to revise an early agreement inked in Washington, D.C. back in 2008. The retail giant Amazon says it will pay bonuses to attract temporary staff as it looks to recruit some 20,000 seasonal workers in the United Kingdom. The company will offer the one-off payments in regions where there is high demand for labour, with extra pay for those willing to work nights. Pay for these temporary roles starts at a minimum of $14 an hour. It will rise to $15 in some parts of the UK. Air France KLM CEO says the Franco-Dutch airline group is deep in talks with Airbus and Boeing and engine makers vying for massive jet order, and it could split the narrow-body purchase between suppliers. According to Ben Smith, the deal will include at least 80 firm orders and 60 to 80 options. Air France KLM announced back in July that it was looking for 160 single-aisle jets for the Transavia discount division and European divisions of the Dutch arm KLM. And finally, Ford has announced plans to invest $11 billion to build several new plants in the US to produce parts for electric vehicles. Ford has described the investment as the single largest one it's made in its 118-year history. The automaker says it will enable it to produce more than 1 million electric vehicles a year. In the second half of this decade, it'll create 11,000 jobs in the process. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. We'll explore Egypt's plans to tax content creators on social media and the mixed reactions it's triggered. And farmers in Nigeria cashing in on broccoli sales amid heightened demand for the produce. The details coming up next. Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the bulletin. Now, envoys from some of the world's richest nations met with South African cabinet ministers this week to discuss a climate deal that could channel nearly $5 billion towards ending the country's dependence on coal. The discussions with South Africa included representatives from the United States, the UK, Germany, France and the EU. The delegation was led by the UK's COP26 envoy, John Merton. South Africa uses coal to generate over 80% of the power that is consumed there, making it one of the world's top 20 carbon dioxide emitters. It's actually ranked 12th worldwide. Eskom, the state energy provider, has pitched a $10 billion plan to global lenders to advance efforts to shut down the majority of its coal-fired power plants by 2050 and turn to cleaner, less polluting energy sources. All right, then, so let's explore the finer details of this proposal, as it were. John Yarwich is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Business Initiative, and she joins us now live from Johannesburg. Thank you for your time this evening. So, developed economies pledged to mobilize at least $100 billion a year when we had the Paris Climate Agreement agreed to, in order to fund climate adaptation efforts in developing economies. But that target hasn't been met yet. So, should we take this off of talks seriously?
Okay, you're quite right. The commitment that was made to, it's mobilizing $100 billion by 2020 and then $100 billion annually after that is in fact what the commitment made was. And you're right, it hasn't been reached internationally. And I think the question is, will anything approaching the quantum of funding be reached? The Conference of the Parties, the climate change negotiations that will happen in Glasgow at the end of this year are seen very much as a finance COP, a place where the details and the pledges and the commitments around that financing will be center on the agenda. And I think it's in that context and in the context of an increasing understanding of the need to decarbonize globally at a much more rapid rate than we ever thought was needed some years ago, that the plan that Eskom is putting forward, Eskom's Just Energy Transaction comes into the equation. And I think it's important to understand that that commitment was by developed countries in order to support the developing world to both decarbonize and to adapt to the impacts of climate change.
So Eskom, of course, is a main source of South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for at least 40% of it, based on the last data sets I looked at. But Eskom being what it is, being the singular provider of energy, and a bunch of that is basically based on coal, how long and how much money would it take to actually decarbonize the entire generation mix?
Okay, so if you're looking at decarbonizing, remember you're looking at two things. You're looking at decarbonizing our generation mix as it is at this point in time, and then you're also looking to growth. So you're not only looking to decarbonize our existing power system, but you're looking for growth in the system in order to support growth in the economy. So you are looking at very large numbers. You are looking at doubling, possibly tripling the grid. You're looking, in addition to that, at as you move into a 2030s and 2040s, because remember, we're looking at a 30-year timescale. So in that 30 years, you're looking at decarbonizing the grid. You're looking at introducing significant renewables. You're looking at strengthening the grid. So there needs to be investment in grid infrastructure. You're looking in the shorter term of that period at also the need for some level of peaking support or some form of power that will support intermittency, so possibly gas as a transition fuel. And then you're looking towards certainly the 2040s, and as you get towards 2050, you're looking towards the introduction of new technologies and possibly technologies we don't even know about today, and on the basis that those will become cheaper over time. So you're looking at a very thoroughgoing decarbonization of the grid that has multiple dependencies and possibilities. And I think that for a country like South Africa, the question of how that can then be used to create new industries, new value chains, new commodities, as well as new forms of delivering power becomes really important.
And we'll get to the new commodities in a bit, but just looking at the sort of proposals on the table, I mean, Eskom is saying we can do this, we can essentially reduce the amount of coal we have in the grid by 2050. That's 30 years away, and that seems like 30 years too long. Is it possible to do it in a much shorter time?
Well, I think the essence of the Eskom proposal is that there is already a decommissioning schedule set out in the country's integrated resource plan. And central to the Eskom proposal is that the decommissioning schedule is brought forward, and that decarbonization and decommissioning of those power stations that are set to be decommissioned between now and 2050 is brought forward. And essentially what that does is to reduce emissions right across not only the Eskom emissions, but emissions right across the economy significantly. So yes, it's about an accelerated decommissioning of coal infrastructure.
Okay, so the country is also aiming to cut carbon emissions to what, 510 metric tons a year by 2025, which is really pretty close. That's roughly the same as emissions in 2017, though. Even taking that target at face value, how would that emissions reduction target be achieved?
Okay, and the emissions reduction target is even more ambitious. South Africa has just committed its latest and has just submitted its latest nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC, and in that one is looking at a range by 2030 of between it's up to 420 at the top end of the range and 350 at the lower end of the range. So it's quite a significantly more ambitious commitment that the country is making. Part of it is this transformation of the energy sector, but there are also obviously other sectors that will need to be decarbonized rapidly. And so, for example, you're looking at Sasol as a major point source of carbon emissions, looking at firstly using gas to power its operations in a very significant way. So cutting coal in huge quantities out of its processes, moving to gas in the short run, but then also investing extremely in very high levels of renewables. So I think that right across South African industry, there's a major conversation that is going on at the moment that is looking at what are the pathways to 2050 that would decarbonize our economy and get it towards net zero. And the NPI, my organization, together with Business Unity South Africa and others, has been doing extensive work on this, trying to define those pathways sector by economic sector. Green hydrogen comes into the equation. We think there's a huge potential around that. Eskom's plan and huge investment in renewables are kind of essential to it.
All right, and that actually brings me to my last question, because export hydrogen, green hydrogen, these were terms that were used in the statement that came out after the meeting between the Department of Energy and, of course, these envoys. So how exactly will this hydrogen export industry work?
Okay, so I think that worldwide there is growing interest and investment in green hydrogen. There are pilot projects right across the world. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Chile, Australia are investing in looking at developing green hydrogen economies. Given our wind and solar in this country and our renewables potential, we are ideally placed, in addition to the fact that through the Sasol Fischer-Tropsch process, we have extensive technological expertise and experience in the kinds of processes that are necessary in order to produce green hydrogen. And also in a South African context, there are other opportunities. There's opportunities for looking at green ammonia, various other forms of green chemicals, looking at green aviation fuels are all potentials that we could be looking at. And certainly what is happening is that in the developed world, in parts of the world where you don't have the kind of wind and solar that we do in the Southern Hemisphere, there's beginning to be partnerships formed in order to say, well, where could the sources of green hydrogen come from? And how could the kinds of trade relationships be established that would enable that to become, in the long run, an important export? So that's the opportunity that South Africa is looking at.
Indeed, pretty interesting stuff. We'll see how this plays out. John Yowich, the Chief Executive of the National Business Initiative, joining us there from Johannesburg. Now, let's head over to Ethiopia. The country is forecasting earnings of over $1.2 billion from coffee exports in the current fiscal year. That will be 30% higher compared to the earnings in the previous 12 months. The industry is undergoing a number of reforms that trade experts say are helping to boost yields. And with other global exporters like Brazil selling a lot less because of bad weather down there, Ethiopia is well positioned to cash in. CGTN's Coletta Njohi reports from Addis Ababa.
At the Ethiopia Commodity Exchange, traders spend their afternoons focusing on one type of good only, coffee. And it is big business, both domestically and internationally.
And when we move to the export session. We have this washed and unwashed coffee sessions. In those sessions, many of variety coffee will trade in our trading platform. So still, we are working on progressing our environment to attain the foreign currency earning, to manage the transaction channel will be efficient and competitive in the international market.
Last year, over 60% of the country's coffee exports came from here, with the international market offering very attractive prices.
When we look into the data, for example, in 2020, we export around 270 metric ton of coffee, and out of it, we generate around 854 million. But this year, we export around 248 metric ton, which is reduced about 8% from the preceding year, but we generate around 907 million. So you can see the volume decline and the price increment out of the data.
Ethiopia's government is keen to ensure farmers benefit from this progress, and it is making reforms to ease business. Part of the policies are targeted at eliminating intermediaries that take advantage of the farmers and now allow the farmers to sell their coffee at the international market directly at competitive prices. But experts say farmers still have to improve their market participation if they are to enjoy more.
In coffee, most of the farmers are smallholders. They are having less than 1 hectare and they produce around 7 quintal out of a hectare. So they don't have the scale to directly come to the market, and they don't have the capacity to process, to wash and mill that coffee, to package up to the standard and bring it direct to the market. But because there is a transparency in terms of market information, they have now in a better position to bargain and to gain a better price for their produce.
With climate challenges leading to a decline in supply from major exporters like Brazil in recent years, increasing the volume of Ethiopia's Arabica bean exports internationally could see the sector and its earnings continue to grow. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's head up north now. Egypt has announced plans to tax its social media content creators, and the reactions are mixed, shall we say. According to a statement issued by the Egyptian tax authority, bloggers and YouTubers in the country will now be required to open tax files at the local tax authority in order to declare their income and pay taxes upon it. Here's Yasser Kim with the details from Cairo.
The decision by Egypt's tax authorities to introduce the new levy has shaken the social media industry that has been operating for years without paying any taxes. Bloggers and YouTubers are to pay 2.5% and rising on profits above $1,000 a year. A 14% value-added tax is then applied, on whose profits have exceeded $32,000 per year since they started their online activities.
This is the right time to impose it. Since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, people resorted to the internet for their daily activities and online trade flourished. It's become unfair for others. For instance, when you have a shop or grocery store and you pay your taxes and expenses while your competitor is selling the same product at a cheaper price online and he's not paying taxes, it's unfair. It's the same for YouTubers. When their videos record high viewership and good revenue, then this profit should be included in the taxes.
Rania Yahya is an influencer who has attracted millions of followers after a successful stint in a hit series, Father of the Bride. On social media, Rania does charity work with poor women, supports small businesses, and is ambassador to the Egyptian Tourism Ministry, which is helping advertise Egypt in the Middle East and North Africa region.
I think it's in the interest of bloggers, influencers, and YouTubers, because this step will legalize what we do. When we pay taxes, then we have to become recognized as an entity and can work normally without any legal hassles.
The social media influencer accepts the principle, but like most in her field, they worry about how the tax will be calculated. Applying haphazard amounts by authorities has been a common practice, especially in new sectors.
This is true especially now that many bloggers falsely brag about earning millions of pounds for PR. So when they submit their low returns to authorities, they could be treated as a tax evader. So the tax authorities should be aware of not doing the same with all bloggers.
هو بالتأكيد طبعا الملف ده جديد على السوق المصري.
This file is new to Egypt, and tax officials have traveled abroad to learn how to calculate and apply this tax and gain experience from other countries that have applied it. The aim is that the tax can be fair for the state and for the bloggers, and to also avoid tax evasion.
The social media tax is one of a raft of levies being introduced by the North African government recently to increase state revenue as it tackles the economic difficulties caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
It's 18:30 GMT, time for a short break. Here's what's on the other side. It's crunch time for the US president as lawmakers battle it out to prevent a government shutdown. And the UK's government has put dozens of soldiers on standby to help ease a crippling gas shortage.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour, starting in Ethiopia. It says it's expelling 7 senior United Nations officials for meddling in its internal affairs. A tweet from the Foreign Affairs Ministry said the officials had 72 hours to leave the country. The UN has raised concerns in recent weeks about a de facto 3-month blockade of aid deliveries to the war-torn region of Tigray. The US State Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi have discussed a raft of issues during a meeting in Cairo. They focused on local and regional issues, including the Grand Renaissance Dam, which is being built in Ethiopia, human rights in Egypt, the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, and regional political concerns. The US announced earlier this month that it would withhold $130 million in military aid to Egypt over human rights concerns. France has reduced the number of visas available to nationals of Algeria, Morocco and Tunisia. It says it took that decision due to the North African nation's refusal to take back illegal migrants sent home by Paris. France has been trying to reach a diplomatic solution ever since it passed a much tougher immigration law back in 2018. And finally, the head of the African Continental Free Trade Area has called for a review of what he termed as an outdated intellectual property rights system as a debate continues to rage around access to COVID vaccines. Omkelemene also added that the current global system was constraining Africa's ability to industrialize. Countries like South Africa and India have been pushing for IP rights to be waived for a very set period of time on COVID vaccines. That's a run through your headlines. All right, then let's get back into the business of energy. We're barely 4 weeks away now from the next United Nations Climate Change Conference, and many countries around the world are facing an unprecedented energy crisis right now. Brent and WTI crude, both benchmarks used to price oil in European and North American markets, they've gone up by over 50% so far in 2021. As natural gas becomes increasingly expensive, some countries from China to the UK, they're turning back to coal to fill that emerging supply gap. As a result, households are facing steep increases in the price of energy, and that's translating into higher prices for other commodities. Even here in Africa, the food index in Kenya, for example, as I mentioned a little earlier in the hour, 10% higher in September. In Nigeria, food inflation hit its highest level in 15 years at a time when the pandemic has slashed the incomes of 70% of the population there. Hours ago, I spoke to Elsie Mbogwa. She's the CEO and founder of Leadwood Energy. We explored how this energy crisis may affect or even frame talks at COP26. But first, we explored how we got here.
Demand has recovered quicker than had initially been expected. OPEC's forecast right now is $100 million per day plus, which is higher than even the pre-pandemic levels. And, it still seems that it's kicking on. So I think for OPEC, they're still in a position where they're still reacting. And so whereas before they had control as a result of the supply, which they hold, but now the entire narrative is driven by demand, and there's a lot of uncertainty with that.
Is OPEC perhaps responding a bit too slowly here? Because, we keep talking about OPEC Plus as this coalition that, drove supply, rather has relatively strong control over certain elements of supply. But given the demand shift that we're seeing now, can they react faster, or are there technical limitations to doing that?
Yeah, I think they are trying to do everything that they can. So I think what we're seeing is many of them, a lot of the OPEC countries, and this includes like OPEC ally Russia and several other countries, are really having a difficult time ramping up as quickly as possible. We're seeing that, that's the case with a lot of the top Africa oil producers as well. I think there's an element of the technical aspect is a lot of them postponed, critical investment last year when you had crude oil prices because they were hanging on for dear life. The other thing that we've been seeing is a lot of issues around maintenance. So there were critical spares that were required that did not, were just not available during COVID. And so as a result of that, this is a lag that we're seeing.
You used to trade gas when you were working at JP Morgan, and we're seeing an enormous energy supply crisis in Europe and in Asia as well. Prices hitting levels that we haven't seen, quadrupling in some cases in the UK. When you're trading gas, did you ever see something like this?
No, this is again is unprecedented. So let me put it into context. I'm sure you're following the gas crisis in the UK at the moment. Gas prices have gone to $26 per MMBTU. So to put that into context, generally in the US, you'd be range bound between $2 to $4 per MMBTU. In Europe, or at least in the UK, it would generally be between $6 to $8 per MMBTU. We're at $26. And then further to that, if you're going to use it as an oil equivalent terms, this is $150 per barrel crude. So Ramah, this is expensive. This is very expensive and it's unsustainable.
This also does strengthen the argument for coal though, doesn't it? Because the trend over the last 5 years has been let's shut down the coal power plants, let's reduce our emissions. But now all of a sudden, you have this oil supply crisis, this gas supply crisis. Prices are getting to levels that are clearly unaffordable for utilities and households. So everyone's going to switch over to coal, right?
So I think not necessarily that it's going to be coal. I think places like China will move to coal. So inherently, I think what it is, it's a win for fossil fuels, not necessarily coal, because so for example, some countries are heavily dependent on nuclear. Some countries like the UK are heavily dependent on gas. I think what we're seeing is the energy where we are not seeing the energy flexibility or where we're not seeing renewables, holding fort, and where we're seeing energy crisis, then fossil fuels are, sort of coming into play.
And of course, the fossil fuel firms are benefiting quite a bit rather. Gazprom shares up, I believe, 70% so far this year. Sasol in South Africa has gone up by, I believe it's over 100% this year alone, just in terms of its share price increase. Yeah. Where does this fit in, though, to the broader conversation around adaptation? Because COP26 is now just basically weeks away, and the conversation for a while has been, we need to switch away from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are bad. But prices are going up now, and the solution, the immediate solution, is to switch to more fossil fuels in quite a few of these markets. How do you think this is going to play out at COP26?
So first, I think I would say the timing could not be worse for COP26 at the moment. With all the, at the moment, what we're seeing is, timing is bad because now we're talking about climate change issues, etc. And almost a stoppage of fossil fuels. And then the second thing is, we're seeing an energy crisis in almost every single part of the globe except North America at the moment. We even saw the White House ask OPEC to pump more oil. We're starting to see IEA was asking Russia to pump more gas. So I think the reality is that in times of extreme weather, fossil fuels continue to save the day.
And even in COP20, with respect to COP26, the fact of the matter is, in the Paris Agreement, the argument was that we're going to provide developed economies to provide $100 billion a year in adaptation funding for developing countries. That money has not showed up. So here we are 5 years later, and a lot of the countries will show up and say, yeah, but you promised X amount of money for adaptation. We're not seeing it. We'll go with what we know, which more likely than not will just be fossil fuels.
Yeah, no, and you rightly call it. So first, the international community in many countries, especially ahead of COP26, I think it's almost every day that we're seeing, some type of announcement in support of the green economy. And I want to be clear that I am in support of energy transition. All I say is that energy transition has to be pragmatic, right? So I think, what we're saying is that the Paris Agreement was done during the Obama administration. I think for us as citizens, I think we should be asking the hard questions, even in light of COP26 coming up. We should be asking for more transparency. I think for the African continent in particular, I continue to stress that we certainly need to have a seat at the table in a lot of these climate change decisions. And, what we're seeing is that everything is not equal. So depending on where we are, like with the gas crisis, gas for the rich is energy security. Gas for the poor, climate can't afford it.
And we're still sticking to that energy theme. The UK government is making preparations to get through Christmas and beyond as the country faces some pretty serious gas shortages. The government, in fact, has put dozens of soldiers on standby to help ease the problem, as Andrew Wilson now reports.
For a fifth day, British drivers in parts of the country are waking up to a continued fuel emergency. Long queues and pumps closed again. The government message is that things are improving, but it's difficult.
What we want to do is make sure that we have all the preparations necessary to get through till Christmas and beyond, not just in the supplying the petrol stations, but all parts of our supply chain. You're seeing the global economy really sucking in a huge amount of demand at the moment.
But that's small comfort to all those up early this morning and waiting in line.
Getting to a point where I may not be able to make my shift, to get to work. So it's not ideal when you work in a hospital or anywhere, really.
I think they're trying to calm people down, is what they're trying to do, which is understandable. But my mum didn't make it to my house the other night. I had to get a jerry can to bring this car back.
With reports of fuel theft and clashes at petrol station forecourts on the rise, union leaders have repeated their calls for government to prioritise key workers at the pumps and find more drivers.
The only thing we can do at the moment to get back to some sort of normality is to get the 100, 200 military drivers to actually start delivering to forecourts, because all of the tankers at the refineries are full up with diesel and petrol, ready to go. We just need some drivers.
There are signs that the government may finally act on this.
Anyone versed in military defence issues knows that it takes a couple of days, sometimes a few days, to get troops on the ground. We've decided to do that, and I think in the next couple of days people will see some soldiers driving the tanker fleet.
As far as European truckers taking up the temporary visas to come back, there was little enthusiasm on the roadside in Poland. No thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, said truck driver Jakub Pajka. I do not think anyone would want to relocate for 3 months just to help the British sort out their Christmas. And at this British goods store in Belgium, which since Brexit has had to switch to suppliers from Ireland for most of its goods, there was also little sympathy for Westminster's predicament.
I think the phrase, I told you so, comes to mind. Not to be childish, but we could see this coming. There had to be repercussions of Brexit. There had to be issues that weren't thought of beforehand, and we're now seeing that.
The stories are building up. School coach trips cancelled, hotel cancellations, weddings postponed, medical couriers delayed, and although the government remains positive, there's still no guaranteed end in sight. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Away from the energy crisis, let's move on to the United Arab Emirates. The Dubai Expo 2020 has kicked off. The exhibition started with a pretty colourful opening ceremony. 3,000 people were in attendance. Global stars also curtain-raising the event, including the Beninese musician Angelique Kidjo. The world-famous expo is being streamed live in over 430 locations in the UAE and worldwide. As the name perhaps implies, the event was cancelled last year due to the pandemic. This time, it's set to run between October the 1st and March the 30th, 2022. Across the Atlantic, it's crunch time for the US President Joe Biden as lawmakers battle it out to prevent a government shutdown. The Senate will vote today on the 30th of September on legislation to fund federal agencies. Now, that in theory could prevent a government shutdown hours before the cash runs out. CGTN's Jim Spellman now reports President Biden is struggling to unite his party while trying to salvage a number of bills that contain trillions of dollars in spending.
Democrats in Washington hope to pass two major spending bills this week. One, a $1 trillion+ infrastructure bill that made it out of the Senate with bipartisan support. The second, a sprawling $3.5 trillion plan that aims to fund much of President Joe Biden's domestic agenda. Democrats will have to pass that one without Republican support. But this isn't Republicans versus Democrats, it's Democrats fighting Democrats. Progressives in the party are pushing for the full $3.5 trillion package, while moderates are pushing for a smaller bill. Biden has been meeting with centrist Democratic Senators Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, but neither lawmaker has publicly come out with exactly what they will support, frustrating progressives.
And right now we're simply waiting for the Senate to come back to us and say what will they vote for, what is acceptable to Joe Manchin, what's acceptable to Kristen Sinema. We can't negotiate against ourselves.
A vote on the infrastructure bill is scheduled for Thursday, but progressives have vowed to vote against it if it comes to the floor without the larger spending bill.
The infrastructure bill is passed alone in the House. We lose whatever leverage we now have, and that would be a big mistake.
The vote has been delayed once already and could be delayed again. After months of mostly keeping his distance, President Biden has begun taking a more hands-on role, canceling a trip Wednesday to focus on negotiations, hoping for a breakthrough. Meantime, two more crises face the Democrats, who control the House and Senate by razor-thin margins. First, the U.S. government will begin shutting down Friday morning without a measure from Congress extending funding. Democrats hope to pass a last-minute plan that would extend government funding through early December.
We're doing everything we can to avoid a shutdown, and we should put something on the floor. We hope our Republican friends will join with us.
And separately, a looming debt ceiling crisis could see the U.S. unable to pay its bills by the middle of October. Republicans vow to oppose Democrats' efforts to raise the debt ceiling. The Democrats can do that on their own, but that would require strict party unity, something the Democrats have shown little of in recent days. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
In the meantime, central bank governors from major economies held a virtual meeting during the ongoing European Central Bank Forum. They expressed their concerns and policy expectations amid the global post-pandemic supply shortages and surging inflation.
The petrol station queues, which I do think now there's some evidence that they are now. I think we may be past the peak of that actually, because we're not actually short of fuel. It was the capacity and the drivers to deliver it actually that caused this.
And the combination of strong demand for goods and the bottlenecks has meant that inflation is running well above target, and we expect that it will continue to do so in coming months before moderating as bottlenecks ease. Raising interest rates for us is a ways off, but ultimately the outlook for next year at the Fed for next year is quite a strong year with growth well above trend and unemployment reaching significantly lower levels than now.
But we think the economy will continue to recover and could reach the level prevailed before the pandemic at the end of this year or early next year. We at the Bank of Japan will continue to maintain extremely accommodative monetary policy in order to achieve the 2% price stability target as soon as possible.
We still have uncertainty. How long those bottlenecks will take to
be resolved and to fade out remains to be seen, because the euro area is a net importer of energy, is the significant increase in the price of energy pretty much across the board, led obviously by gas, by electricity, by oil to a certain degree as well.
The 13th China International Aviation and Aerospace Exhibition is currently underway in Guangdong province. Airliners have expressed optimism about China's aviation industry, particularly supply chains remain stable despite the pandemic. Juju has more.
As the global aviation industry suffers losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic, China is one of the few countries that offers clear growth opportunities and a stable supply chain in the sector. International operators say they can therefore cash in on the growing demand in the country.
I think that we have been extremely surprised by how agile and fast the supply chain has been in China to adapt, protect the employees, so that we can ultimately avoid any disruption. And that was fundamental and extremely challenging.
Airbus recently delivered its first A320 fuselage system assembly directly to its supplier in Tianjin. Previously, major components of the final assembly has to be done in Europe and then shipped to Tianjin. Since Airbus established a new assembly plant, delivery can be done locally, which greatly increased efficiency.
The cooperation between Tianjin and Airbus is a long-time cooperation. This has addressed many items. The first one is the environment to develop industrial activities. We've got a lot of Tianjin support during the pandemic, particularly to set up and to get some advice about how to protect our employees with regards to the pandemic. But we got as well some support about working conditions, how we can exchange and get employees travel from China to Europe, from Europe to China.
Now the supplier can produce 6 aircraft per month, accounting for about 10% of the total output of Airbus narrow-body aircraft. Boeing's latest market forecast is also bullish on the Chinese market. It says that China's resilient aviation market will create demand for new commercial aircraft worth about $1.5 trillion in the next 2 decades. That will account for about 20% of the global aircraft demand by then. Zhuzhu, CGTN, Zhuhai in Guangdong province.
A quick update on commodity prices. We're going to slip back into that energy discussion for a bit. Oil prices have slipped a little bit today. Brent holding over just under $78.60 a barrel. But as Elsie pointed out a little earlier, the market is essentially in a deficit supply position. According to analysts, it will be for a while to come. They think about 6 months out, all the way through to March next year. OPEC is estimating that oil supplies will be short by about 1.2 million barrels a day next month and just under 1 million barrels in November. Still to come in the program. We'll explore why farmers in Nigeria are cashing in on broccoli sales amid heightened demand for that vegetable.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. One last story for you in this hour. This one's from Nigeria. Farmers over there are cashing in on broccoli amid heightened demand for the crop. It's known for its nutritional benefits. But more and more people around the world are looking for ways of building up their immunity, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And broccoli fits neatly into that narrative. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports from Jos in Nigeria's Plateau State for Grassroots.
It's another harvest week for 35-year-old Ilya Ndongs. The broccoli farmer picks the yields for onward sale at the vegetable market. Ndongs veered into broccoli farming over a decade ago. He considers it a lucrative venture, more so as his sales have nearly doubled in recent months due to a rise in demand.
I went into broccoli farming because it is profitable, and we now have buyers from all over. The buyers come Mondays and Thursdays, that is twice a week, and we sell to them in kilograms. I sell a kilogram for 1,000 naira. On Mondays I sell 100 kilograms, and on Thursdays I sell another 100 kilograms. I sell almost 200 kilograms weekly.
Broccoli is a nutritional powerhouse full of vitamins, minerals, fiber and antioxidants. Consumption of broccoli in Nigeria has bolstered since the outbreak of COVID-19, as more people are aware of its nutritional benefits. Now the viable business is an attraction to traders here.
We go into villages in Plateau State where this broccoli is farmed to buy it. We send it to Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt and other states where it's not cultivated. It's not very popular. Not everyone eats it. It wasn't until recently that people were beginning to become aware of it because of its nutritional value. In fact, when we take it to some places, people are surprised and wonder what type of crop this is. Now people are aware of its nutritional value, and you can see it in markets in the vegetable section. Now people consume it a lot.
It also contains a lot of antioxidants, and it's also reputed to also have ability to reduce inflammation. And in this COVID era, most nutritional management of COVID include the intake of a lot of antioxidants, which will be able to take care of the free radicals.
Broccoli is easy to cultivate and available all year round. It could make for a viable export commodity, but like others, broccoli farmers are limited by several factors, including climate change, infrastructural degradation, insecurity and funding, most of which are far beyond their control. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Jos, Plateau, Nigeria.
And that's where we wrap up this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program. Many ways to get your feedback back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.